426 applications in 2011, and how many were granted?
I'm sorry, this is basically 426 applicants were granted approval in 2011. In other words, 426 applied and received the approval. If the approval is not granted, we may suspend the draft. In other words, we can wait for 1 year to observe, and 1 year later, we can then decide whether or not this person is eligible to apply for alternative military service. As for the number of the actual applicants, I don't have the data at hand. I can get back to you after the meeting. I'm not sure about the specific number.
Number of people who applied and who were not granted the right to serve alternative military service. And the other question is, you said it's on religious grounds. If I am atheist or I'm not following one religion, but I still feel for philosophical reasons, for the reasons of conscience, I just do not want to serve in the army, I am not eligible for alternative service. Is that correct?
In fact, there are many reasons for the applicant to use to apply for alternative services. For example, if this applicant has some specialization, say in psychology, and some of our agencies need people in this field or need people who have computer science expertise, then people with these expertises can apply for alternative services. It doesn't have to be always on a religious ground. As to whether there are people who applied but rejected, I need to go back and look it up. And if a person has no religion and want to use a religious ground to apply for alternative services, then this will not be approved. But there are other reasons this person can use. For example, he is the only kid in the family, and the parents are getting old, and this only child has to stay home to take care of the parents. Then these can be considered a legitimate ground as well. I just received some information for my colleagues that all the applicants who filed the application on religious ground were all granted. So the number I mentioned, 426, means that there were 426 people who applied on that ground, and all of the cases were granted.
Review committee, and after review committee come to a conclusion, can you go to ordinary court to decide? Thank you.
因为委员问到这个问题。
Okay, this is a more technical question. I don't have this information in my hand right now. Maybe may I supplement this information after the meeting? Because there are so many grounds. So we have such a review meeting, but allow me to provide the backgrounds of these review members to you after the meeting.
What he asked. Who are the members of the review committee? How do you choose members of the committee?
这个审议委员会
I think it is stipulated in laws and regulations. The Ministry of Interior has a subordinate agency which is in charge of the alternative service, and this agency establish a review panel and invite some representatives or experts to be on this panel. But currently, I don't have this organization act for this review committee, so I have to go back and check.
Against the decision of the review committee, then can you go to ordinary court?
应该，哦，这个部分它。
I think this is an administrative measure, so it will, well, a petition can apply, and if the petition result is not satisfactory, then this person can go to administrative court to ask for administrative remedies. And the review committee includes members who are nominated by 21 religious groups. So 21 religious groups nominated impartial and neutral people to be on this committee.
So since it's only religious people, if I'm an atheist, probably I don't have so much chances to be eligible. But I had another question. You said all adult men have the obligation to serve in the military, so I conclude women do not have this obligation. But do women have the right to serve in the military?
可以，因为
Yes, they can do that. I know in our military there are women, because in our system there is compulsory service and voluntary service. So if there are positions that are vacant, and if some women want to apply for these positions, then I think she can use this application to apply for a position in the military.
One brief question under Article 20, if we can go on to Article 20, is that do you have a law that criminalizes advocacy of racial, national, religious hatred that constitute incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence? In other words, do you have a law where somebody who incites people on the basis of religion to violence is an offense? Because this is also a negative form of protection for people who are threatened by pronouncements of threat and harassment which turn violent in certain societies. It probably doesn't happen in your society, fortunately, but it does happen in all other societies. That is why this is a kind of a guarantee for protection of threat and protection from fear and violence to people who may be susceptible to the kind of incitement that people throw out on the basis of religion. So just my question, do you have a law on these patterns or not?
We have a Genocide Act, stipulates that genocide is an offense. And to incite people to commit crimes is an offense. Or when one threatens another not to join a religious group, that's an offense too. So our current act right now is the Genocide Act. And we're considering incorporates the Convention on the Prevention of Genocide into our domestic law.
will be observing that they could make a law like this. But anyway, just going on to Article 21, the Parade Act,
I was not completely clear because we are mixing up two things. One is genocide. The question is incitement to religious, ethnic, racial hatred, which is something totally different. If I'm not committing any acts, I'm only in hate speech. Hate speech, I'm speaking out against the followers of a particular religion or an ethnic group. So I incite people to hatred, but I'm not committing myself any kind of physical act. That, according to Article 20, must be prohibited by law, which is interpreted by criminal law, in fact. And that was the question, is that existing in Taiwan or not? Because if not, you would have an obligation to create a specific criminal provision of incitement to hatred.
Well, we are also drafting a religion act. Maybe we can incorporate that element into our religion act. And in our criminal code, there is some provision that may apply. Well, maybe the incitement to discriminate, I would like to respond. Provisions related to discrimination scattered around in different laws or regulations. We don't have a single anti-discrimination act. So far, there hasn't been any consensus on devising an anti-discrimination act. So is it possible to include all the necessary provisions in one anti-discrimination act? I think it requires more discussion in Taiwan. But take our Immigration Act, for example. One of the provisions states that if foreigners are discriminated against, they will be subjected to the...
Look at the time. I don't think we are talking about discrimination per se here. You know, we are talking about an element of threat and violence as well. I leave it up to you. We always remain available to you when you're making your legislation. But this is an obligation, as Mr. Nowak said, for you to make a legislation on this. And the criminal code would be the best place to do it. And you have anti-discrimination spread out, of course, from civil to criminal to labor laws to everything. That goes on its own. This has a special nuances to itself. So we leave it with you, how you want to do it. We'll be recommending, as you would agree, that this should be done. This is done only for your own protection, and that you do it. But because I really want Shanthi to finish her thing before we leave, is now we come to the last section, the article that I have, is Article 21 on Assembly. And the Parade Act, Article 21, where you have to give permits, and these in the past or even now have been very arbitrarily given, as we have several complaints from NGOs. Now, I know that you tried to make amendments in the legislature on the Parade Act, but these amendments failed. Is there another initiative to push for these amendments? Because in any event, if you don't allow it, and you have the arbitrariness about it, people will demonstrate without permits then, because they now know that the two covenants are part of domestic law. And so how will you really bridge that gap if you continue to have this law? Because this is very restrictive law on freedom of assembly.
谢谢委员有关这个部分。
Thank you for your remarks. And I think the government is working hard to change the permits into notification in our Assembly and Parade Act. And in 2011, the revision of this act was not completed. So a Human Rights Task Force asks that we need to come up with some following measures. So the Ministry of Interior in 2001 established a list. It is an administrative order that we can give to our police forces to implement the provisions related to assembly and parade as protected under ICCPR. And now there's some turnover at our legislative yuan. So in May 2012, we submitted the revision again for their review, and we continue to communicate with the legislators at our parliaments in hopes that they will pass this revision. So there is administrative measure, and there is our continuous effort to communicate with the legislators. Now, currently, even though there's the permit requirement, but in 2012's figures, I can tell you that there were 3,737 cases of demonstration, and we denied only 45 cases, which account for only 1.2% of total cases. And the reason of the rejection or of the denied is that many of them have already sent their applications to other agencies, or the owner of the place where they want to protest do not allow such protests, and that's why their cases were denied. So the small number of cases which were denied for some objective reasons, not arbitrary reasons.
Thank you very much for this information. I think the government has agreed that the Assembly and Parade Act is not in conformity, and they will do whatever they can as quickly as possible to convince the legislative yuan to adopt a better Assembly and Parade Act. With that, we finalize Article 21, and I hand over to Shanthi Dairiam for the remaining articles. That means 22 to 25. You have the floor. And we have still 40 minutes.
No, 40 is not much time. Just a second. Oh my gosh.
Or you would like to?
Well, I Okay, we are under Article 22, freedom of association. I have a question under that, and that relates to the Act regulating association. And the question that I have is that there is more difficulty for associations to be formed by civic society, but it's much easier for political parties to be formed, and that there are more restrictions and more regulations when it comes to civic society organizations. This is the information we have. I would like a brief explanation as to why it is more difficult for civic society organizations to form associations, and is there any review of this act, and would there be any reform of this act? If you could just quickly answer that. Because they are subject, both political party associations and formation of civic society organizations are subject to different levels of scrutiny. Why is it more difficult for civic society to form associations? Yeah.
First of all, according to our People's Group Act, there is a distinction between political parties. Excuse me, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Maybe the battery is dead. Can you hear us? Microphone test. Can you hear the interpreter? Okay. So in the People's Group Act, the Civil Association Act, yes, there's such a distinction. Political parties are one category, and civil society is another. And you said why there's a difference in terms of the restrictions and requirements. I'll ask my colleague to respond to the question. In response to your question, indeed, these civil associations would have to meet certain requirements, such as 30 people in the association, and all the members have to be at least 20 years of age. In order to comply with the covenant, we are amending the Act. So in the future, civil associations only need to register with the competent authority. They don't need to apply for permission in order to become associated. And we are working on the amendment of the Civil Association Act so as to comply with the covenants. Thank you.
I mean, is there a time frame for this amendment? Because there are many restrictions. Not only that you must have 30, but you have quorum for meeting, you stipulate the quorum for meeting, on the rules, the bylaws, everything is regulated. So is there a time frame? And I'm glad you're saying you recognize that that act is problematic. Is there a time frame? Is there a plan and a time frame for the amendment?
In this regard, the draft was presented to the Executive Yuan, but the Executive Yuan would like to see more comprehensive consideration of all related issues. So it sent it back to the Ministry of the Interior. We so far have organized 7 meetings to review the draft. We hope that by the end of the legislative session, we can submit it for the legislators' review. Moreover, to amend the Civil Association Act, Well, I think there will still be a distinction between the industrial associations, for example, the educational associations, the industrial associations, and the commercial associations. Therefore, the application for approval still applies for these associations.
时间的话，
As for the timeline or timetable, we have other provisions that impose similar restrictions on people's association right. So the Executive Yuan expects us to compile these related laws for amendment. We know now it's the end of February. We expect that by the end of June, we will be able to complete the draft for the Executive Yuan's review before we submit it to the legislative body.
Because I also read that there are at least 14 other laws in which have provisions which have an implication for the formation of these associations. So you have to do a comprehensive review. Very quickly, I hope you are also consulting civil society members on the amendments and the reform, that they are consulted in the review. And we won't prolong this discussion. We can go to the next article, and that is the article pertaining to the family. I'm afraid there are many issues here. One is that there is a problem, as we see it, in the recognition or the non-recognition of diversity of family formations of families, and there isn't equality for different kinds of union. So we have a problem with same-sex marriages. We have a problem with cohabitatees, and they do not receive the same protection and benefit partners in these of the law. I read again that there is going to, the other question that we raised was whether there is any gathering of information on the demographic data on people who have alternative ways of living together. And your reply has said there isn't, that kind of data has not been collected. And the other question we asked was whether there is a survey of the particular problems then, since there is no recognition in the law, what are the real problems that these alternative families face? And you have said there is the gender equality department will become responsible for looking after the welfare of these families, and that since they are been set up fairly recently, a survey on the needs of these families have not yet been made, but I get the impression that you do intend to look into it, and I will urge, and we can put it into our concluding observations, that they have to do the survey of the needs. But the only question I want to raise here is, in the replies you have also stated that you want to do a public survey on the recognition of such families. What does society think about the recognition? That is what I read. Is that correct? I thought I saw that that you intend to do also a survey or public survey. If you do, for lack of time, I don't want to engage in a long debate, but I just want to say, if you do that, it is again, you're falling back on existing societal values and norms, and the law can change society. You do not have to wait for society to change before the law catches up. Yeah? So I would urge you to pay serious attention and consideration of the alternative forms of family that are in existence already in the country. That is one issue. The other issue is the education in schools, and I want to come to the issue of schools. The education, there was an intention or is an intention to introduce sexual diversity and gender equality education in schools, but my impression is that it is not yet implemented, and there was no clear answer or response to the question that we raised in the list of issues as to what is the reason for the delay. So maybe you could tell us that. Why is there a delay in gender equality and sexual education, sexual diversity education? Because when we're introducing a new normative standard, yes, society must catch up, but society, you can persuade society to catch up by widespread education. And so why is there a delay? But you didn't give a clear answer in the list of issues. Any response to that? Is there anybody here who can answer that?
The Executive Yuan has set up a department of gender equality, but we don't have a representative from that department. Yes, okay, so there's a representative from the Department of Gender Equality. Good. Thank you for raising the issue. With regard to sexual diversity education, yes, your understanding is correct. We have not yet done a national census on the sexual diversity. Some local governments have done this, but not a national one. As for the DGBAS, it is planning on organizing such a national census. Because this is a new endeavor, we do not have relevant experiences. We will have to prepare first. As for the sexual diversity education and the right to work, there are legal protection in place. After the setup of the Department of Gender Equality in August last year, we invited representatives from different government agencies to discuss, to share what difficulties they have encountered in promoting the sexual diversity education programs. And one issue raised is about the application for new ID cards. Moreover, the rights and interests related to marital relationship are also another issue raised. So the MOJ is looking into possible laws in relation to the same-sex marriage in 3 different countries. So we are doing our homework, hoping to be better prepared. Next, I would like to ask the MOE and the MOJ to respond.
We have a delegate from MOJ to respond to this question. I'm from MOJ, and in terms of same-sex partnership, just as the director of the Department of Gender Equality says, we've studied the systems in Germany, in France, and in Canada, because they already have same-sex partnership systems, and we have completed our research reports. From these reports, we can see that the 3 countries all have their respective system. So we want to continue our research. Since these countries have different systems, how should we come up with our own system? We need to do a feasibility study based on our own domestic situation. Should we include the same-sex marriage in our civil code, or should we come up with a separate system that protect the rights of same-sex couple? And other benefits or rights, such as rights to inheritance, right to medical services. These are many other elements that are related to same-sex couples, and our department is continuing our research. Now, on behalf of Ministry of Interior, I want to talk about the registration of sex or ID on the ID card. In our survey and in our census information, there are only two genders, male or female, and we're considering to add a third option, a third gender. And we are also studying how we should implement this. What form should we adopt? What format should we adopt? Because in the past, this issue had not yet been discussed. So we just started the discussion, and we will continue to do that. I'm from Ministry of Education. Now, speaking on gender equality education, in 2004, we promulgated the Gender Equality Education Act, and it is stipulated that there should be 4-hour education on gender equality every week. So based on that need, we revised the curriculum guidelines for elementary schools and junior high schools. And in 2011, the curriculum was implemented, but there was some opposition from parts of the society. So MOE was asked to review the curriculum again. We have to do more study. And we submit the result of our study in 2012. And this curriculum now is being implemented. And Taiwan now is also upholding a more open attitude toward transgender. In the past, there was a really high threshold for people if they want to change their sex on their ID, because they have to prove that they have the attributes of the other gender or sex before they can change their registration on their ID card. But these restriction has been loosened. For example, if a psychiatrist can provide a certificate saying that this person is in fact in another sex mentally, then he or she will be allowed to change that identification on his or her ID card.
You are getting more open, and that's very good. I would just suggest, and we'll put it into the concluding observations, that education especially you started in schools and you're doing it, and it's very good, is the best way to go, because you'll create a new generation of people with a younger generation with an open mind. And I would strongly urge that you keep up this education and you review the curriculum periodically as well to meet the needs of that entire sector of society. But I want to go to another point in relation to schools, and that is there are many reports of bullying, and violence against students in school, and even sexual assault both by teachers and by other students. I did read that there are many policies and laws that are in place and interventions, that you have put in place in order to arrest this problem, to stop the problem. But what I need you to explain to me is how effective are all the policies and programs you have in school to make schools safe for students from bullying and from violence? The existence of these policies or laws or interventions on their own is not enough. So how are you monitoring what is happening? What are there cases where you've actually taken action against teachers or other students? Is it possible for the victims to actually complain? Is there a procedure, and a very confidential procedure, by which the victims can actually make a complaint? And the other explanation that will be useful for us today is you have assigned the Department of Military to be in charge of bullying prevention. I find that a little unusual. Why should the military be brought into a school? This should be addressed by the Ministry of Education and your own procedures. So this is what I read. You have the military, Department of Military Training to be in charge of bullying prevention. So maybe you can give us a quick explanation of the rationale for bringing the military in to control the problem. That's one question. And the other question is, are you evaluating and monitoring the effectiveness of the policies and the programs or even the law that you've put in to control the situation and make schools safe for children? Is the law actually working? Are you taking action? You know, that is, how are you evaluating and monitoring it?
Thank you.
我谢谢委员刚刚的一个提问哈。那有关学校校园安全，
Thank you very much.
教育部
When it comes to the safety of campus, the MOE
特别是
does have a program.
校园防治霸凌的一个办法，
We have a guideline to stop campus bullying.
一些基本的作为。
We have some basic measures. First of all, it takes prevention.
在校园中，这个就是在
For example, we organize Friendly Campus Week during the first week of a semester to educate students the importance of not bullying the students.
I know the programs. We've read it, what you have. So you don't have to tell us what you are doing. My question is, how are you ensuring the effectiveness? Are you monitoring it? How many cases where complaints have been made and you've actually taken action against the perpetrators? That's what we want to know. You have very good interventions. I've read that. What you've put in place in principle and on paper is good. So tell us how you're monitoring it and how you're making sure action is being taken again in these
好，
areas.
谢谢。在推动的过程里面，我们每一年都有一个教育部对地方的一个教育
Every year, MOE
校园安全大有
supervise every campus and include safety campus as one of the evaluation item, and the evaluation results will determine partially how much the funding this school will get. And MOE also organize a campus safety meeting
学校通报的，
very regularly.
我们都会逐一列管。
So we follow up all the complaint
还有我们
cases.
国民教育所，国民教育所
We also have a national education agency. There's a subgroup
的案件
that asks all the schools to finish dealing with each of the complaint. So we follow up each case of complaints, and we have meeting every week.
校园性侵害的相关的机制。
Then speaking of sexual harassment or sexual assault on campus, my colleague will respond to that. Our Gender Equality Act has some provisions, and there are subordinate regulations as well. As long as a student thinks he or she is sexually abused or sexually attacked, these students can file an on-campus complaint, and the school has to follow the confidentiality principle, and the school needs to establish a research group that includes people from the school and people from outside the group. If the complaint is valid, then perpetrator has to receive some discipline. And if the perpetrator is a teacher, then the teacher will be fired, and he or she will never be able to be hired as a teacher anymore. We also provide some counseling. For example, during the time of investigation, we provide a flexible adjustment for the students, and we give flexibility as to some special holidays for these students as well.
Do you have any data on teachers who have been fired because of sexual harassment or assault in the past few years? Do you have
Last year, there were 12 students who were involved in sexual attack or sexual harassment cases and were fired. So 12 teachers from last year.
another issue in
But
under?
sorry, I think your question about the military has not been responded to.
Yes, the question that I asked was whether the military training unit, whatever they are called, has been utilized to control bullying.
对，军训教官基本上就是。
Yeah, the military officers were transferred from the Ministry of National Defense to schools. They have to receive 3 weeks education before they are assigned to schools to work. And these people do not provide counseling, but they are in charge of reporting cases, safety cases on campus. For example, if there are typhoons or earthquakes, some natural disasters, then these military trained officers will help the report. And when it comes to counseling, it is the teachers who provide counseling. Some teachers have received training in counseling, so they have the capacity to do that, and we have special funding for higher counselor teachers on campus so that they can help students. So these military officers, as I mentioned, are not really those one who provide counseling for students on campus.
So the military officers have nothing to do with not counseling, but bullying. You know, they don't provide discipline for bullying. They don't discipline the students for bullying? No. It's only for natural disaster. Because that's what you've just said.
学校霸凌事件的话，我们有。
Well, in terms of bullying incidents, every school has to respond. Every school has to establish a response team that includes teachers or other people. If it is a serious case, then parents will be included in this team too. So it is the bullying incident group or task force that is in charge of the dealing of bullying incidents on campus. Thank you very much.
Is any member of the military in this team, a member of this task force or team? Is a military person also in that task force? It is not.
霸凌小组里面没有教官。
No, no military officers are on this task. But we have a student's office, and there's a director of the student's office that is on the team.
跟我人补充的话，学务处那个主任是由老师兼的。
And this director of the student's office is a teacher. He or she will not be a military officer.
Okay, under the same article, there is another question that I would like us to discuss, and that is, I also read that adultery is penalized, and that both husbands and wives can be charged, are equally liable in case there's a situation of adultery. My question to you is, how useful is this law really? And secondly,
no wonder your jails are so full.
how useful is this law? And secondly, do you think that although it is neutral and is supposed to be applied equally to husbands and wives, that women may have a differential impact on women? Do you think in any way it affects women negatively than men? What is your assessment of this law?
You think because they're less faithful?
I don't think so, because this offense is punishable by imprisonment no longer than 1 year, and the husband or the wife will have to file a charge before this case will be handled by the court. And we are also looking into amending this law. So thank you for your opinion. We will take that into consideration as we amend this law.
If adultery was linked with matrimonial decisions or money to be divided between the family or no fault business, that's acceptable. But like I look at it in a lawyer's perspective, it is a victimless crime or a victimless act, let me put it that way. To make it into a crime of 1 year punishment, it's like saying, well, it's your bad luck, you get caught. And so you're in. These are human failings, you know. So these are maybe so-called sins, but these are human failings. So I don't know. You're a very advanced society, unlike my society, where if a man touches a woman's hand also is also punishable. So I think that if you advance, we will advance after you. So these things should not be in a society like Taiwan. They look okay in a society like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, but not here.
See, however, you know, what I want you to consider is every action that we take, every law, every policy, however neutral it is, we cannot assume because it is neutral, it applies to men, it applies to women, that it is in effect neutral, that there is always a differential impact on different groups of people, regardless. Because we also have information which you don't seem to have, and I'm very sorry that you haven't studied the impact. And that is that more women, after they file their complaint about adultery against their husbands, are persuaded to withdraw the case. Women are more vulnerable in society, so they are under pressure. When they file a complaint against their husbands, for various reasons, they may be dependent on the husband for financial security. Society believes that women should not complain against the husband. And therefore, even the whole family may persuade her to withdraw the case. And I even have...
But they want to change the law anyway.
Yeah, but still...
Perhaps we can come to Article 25.
So it can no longer be boys, can be boys.
No, but they still have to understand this. I know, but you're giving me too little time, Manfred. No, I want to say, no, I have the data. It says 50% of husbands' cases were dismissed as compared to only 23% of women's cases were dismissed because the women were under pressure to withdraw it. So you have to understand these differences in the social and economic empowerment and status of women. So it is never neutral. It's never neutral. You have to study it, okay? And there's also a difference sometimes in courts on the conviction rate of men and the conviction rate of women as well. So, okay, we can move now. I think we have finished with, yeah, we can go to the next issue, which is Article 24 on the child. The protection of children, as we all recognize, is extremely critical. Again, you have good laws in place, you have protection procedures in place to prevent and address child abuse. You have foster home, placement homes, correctional institutions. You have many things. Again, my question is, how effective are you monitoring its effectiveness? And if you ask me, if there's one thing that we need to focus on, it is ensuring that the laws, policies, and other programs are actually working well. It's because in principle you have it all. So my question is, whether the in spite of the fact that you have hotlines, people can call and complain about child abuse, do people really call? How effective? Because we also read that there is again a cultural environment which believes that the child belongs to the parents. It's owned by the parents, and therefore you should not interfere if there is any abuse of the child in the home. So are you monitoring and looking at the weaknesses in implementation and supervising professionals and social workers who you've talked about? What kind of budgetary allocation are you giving? Sometimes the programs are there, but there isn't enough budgets, even for training of professionals in charge. So that is my question. What is your system for monitoring and understanding where is the weakness in implementation? There's always a weakness in implementation. Are you doing this?
Who would like to reply, please?
Maybe later the Judicial Yuan can provide additional information later. First of all, in terms of the prevention of domestic violence,
abuse. We're not talking about spousal abuse. I see. Okay, fine. Carry on.
In our domestic violence definition, some cases are related to child abuse. So we do collect data in this area. In terms of the reported cases, child abuse cases indeed have been on the rise. According to the data in 2012, child abuse cases reported grew by 13% compared to, 3% compared to 7 years ago. Moreover, we have a special committee composed of experts and scholars who would continuously monitor these new programs, and these committee would ask the government agencies to produce quarterly reports on these programs. Well, as we are talking about child abuse, this morning when we discussed Article 9 of the Covenant, you asked about the number of children put on placement. Last year, 2,414 children were put in placement last year. These children may stay with their relatives. And 211 of them stayed with their relatives. As for those staying with foster homes, 1,063. As for institutional placement, 1,130 of these children were placed in institutions. Children's Bureau, you asked about monitoring. We would pay close attention to serious child abuse cases. In the event of such incidents, we would organize a task force composed of government officials and other scholars and representatives to discuss how we deal with these serious child abuse cases. So we would reflect on what we have done, what we could do better. Moreover, we would also evaluate local government performances in preventing child abuse and domestic violence. So we would review local government's performance in the protection of children and youth. Again, civil society, civil groups, and scholars and the representatives are invited to join in this work. And very often we would have on-site inspections. We would also listen to the reports of local governments, and we would also listen to the advice offered by independent scholars and experts. If these local governments performed poorly in these areas, the budgets they get next year may be influenced.
Because we are over time already, but we are almost through, and I have to apologize also that the male part of the panel was discriminating against the female part in taking up too much time. Would it still be possible to give us another 10 minutes? I'm putting this question to the interpreters first, but also to all of you, whether you would still be willing to spend another, would 10 minutes or most 15 minutes be enough for you to still deal with the remaining questions? Would that be possible? Thank you very, very much. I know it's an extra burden. Okay, we will try to be really as to the point as possible, please.
I was very pleased to hear the last response that you do local, you do evaluate local government in the way they perform their functions, and they will not get their funding if they do not perform well. But the only concern I would have is then that they will even perform their functions even more badly because they have no money after that, you know. So there has to be some other way of taking action. Cutting funds may not, in my view, be the best way to do it. But you are talking about monitoring all their functions, including the way children are protected, etc. Yeah, you're looking at everything. That's what I understand. No? Yes. In this area, I have another quick question. In that, in the programs that you have for the protection of children, do you have special programs for children with special needs for protection because there are parents in jail or they are abandoned for various reasons? So is there a special approach to children who could be identified from high-risk families?
Yes, indeed. Of course, we would also provide positive incentives in terms of funding. In other words, the basic budget will not be influenced. As for special programs, yes, we do have one dedicated to the high-risk families. Because this high-risk families are more likely to have child abuse problems. So we have realized that very often child abuse arises from family disputes or the poor economic situation in the family. So for these kind of families, we would like to take preventive actions. So we commission private civil organizations. First of all, the local government has to report these high-risk families to the competent central authority, and then we would commission civil organizations to pay home visits to these families. And if necessary, we could provide emergency financial aid, like 3,000 in New Taiwan dollars. If the parents are jobless, we would also ask local labor affairs department to help these parents to find jobs. Hopefully, by improving their economy, they will be better parents to take care of their kids.
Really good again. I need to also raise one more question here. This is about families where children are born in this country to women who may have to leave this country because they do not belong to this country. But the child has a right to stay in this country because the child was born here. Are there any policy or legal measures by which it will be possible for a mother to stay back and not be repatriated so that she can be with her child and remain in this country legally? Are there policy or legal measures for that?
Well, I can address this issue for two aspects. If it is a legal marriage relationship, then the mother can stay. If there is illegality, and the mother will need to go back to her own country before she can come again. But if the children are Taiwanese national, then they can come back to Taiwan.
What you're saying, but this may be a situation where the child may not be legally received in the home country of the woman because the child was not born there, and father may have been a non-national of that country. No, then can she stay back with her child under any circumstance? It's not such an integrity question. If they're saying under certain circumstances the child can go with the mother and they can all come back legally, but maybe we don't discuss it. But this is an issue that you may want to think about, yeah? And just in this area, before we go to the last article, is the issue of spousal abuse, domestic violence in relation to spousal abuse. Again, in your reports and in your answers, you have discussed this, and you've again talked about the many programs that you have that women can get remedies and so on. But again, there is data which says that at least 40%, surveys have shown by other organizations, non-governmental, that at least 41% of women have suffered violence in the family, and that 60% of these victims do not ask for help. They do not come and report because social environment is not conducive to them reporting. The value system or the culture is that you must not expose these incidents that happen in the family. How would you address this? Are you aware that there are many women who do not report because of a non-conducive social environment? And has there been any thought about helping such women and creating a community acceptance of the fact that there should be no violence against women and that they deserve remedies and help?
我想我首先要做一个说明。
I heard from an NGO saying that 40% of the families suffer the problem of domestic violence. And the government had some discussions and communication with this NGO, and we think this number is not accurate or precise, because this NGO used the data from an online headhunter's website and ask whether this website has conducted any survey on domestic violence. But so it asked about sexual harassment instead, not really domestic violence. So my point is that there isn't a very clear figure on the percentage of domestic violence, but we always commission scholars to experts to do some research, and from their research, I remember the percentage of domestic violence is about maybe 15% or 10%. So I clarify that the 41%, the figure you mentioned, 41% was inaccurate, and the NGO itself admit that this figure is not correct. Now, violence between spouses sometimes is very hard to be recorded. That's why education and promotion is so important. So on newspapers, on TV programs, we encourage victims to come out to report. The spouse, your husband, has no right to abuse you. So the hotline 113 is there and is very accessible. And if you know some of your friends or relatives suffer from domestic violence, you can call that hotline as well. Our laws and regulations also stipulate that medical workers or immigration agency workers, immigration officers, or county officers, anyone in the government who knows there is such an incident has the obligation to report it. And now Taiwan has a Prevention Act of Domestic Violence. I think it is the first of its kind in Asia, and we have different levels of measures to deal with or to resolve domestic violence. So this is our current practice right now.
Any questions from your side? No? Can we go to the last article, which is Article 25 on political participation? I have a few issues here. In the list of issues and questions, the question raised was, in your view, in the view of the government, are there any impediments or barriers to people's full participation in the political process, in the electoral process? The only issue that you have mentioned is the fact that there are deposits that people have to pay, which some people may find is a bit too much for their own, whether they can afford it or not. That's the only issue raised. But I think there are a few other issues, one of which is the age of voting, which is I think 20. And the question that non-governmental organizations are raising is, why can't it be 18 when the age of marriage for girls is 16? And I want to also raise that as an issue. For boys it is 18, and a girl can get married at the age. It's a very responsible thing to do, to get married and even have children. Why is it that voting, why are you keeping that in your books, that voting has to be 20? That is, so you're restricting a lot of young people from exercising their franchise. That's one thing. And while I'm still on it, although it's not related to this issue and I forgot to raise it under the family, would you consider making equal the age of marriage as 18 for both boys and girls? Do you have any thoughts on that, whether there is a differential age of marriage, minimum age of marriage, 18 for boys and 16 for girls? Why are you maintaining that? Under CEDAW, you recommended that it should be the same age, and that should be 18. So do you have a quick response to that?
想我还是先说明一下。
Okay, one of the questions you raise is voting age, whether to reduce it from 20 to 18. It is an issue being discussed by our society right now. And when we consider this issue, we need to consider that there are supporting and opposing voices. And there is regulation in our civil code that for a person to have full ability to being responsible for him or herself, the age is 20. So according to civil code, the legal age is 20. So I think what we need to do is to continue to have that discussions. Another question is on barriers to elections. Well, as you mentioned, deposits may be a concern. But when we review core document yesterday, we also discussed deposits. And our current discussion is whether to, well, in addition to have deposits, we need to have another system that is for this candidate to collect enough signatures to support that he or she has enough support and to be able to join the elections. And some people maybe leave their hometowns, or they are in military services, or they are abroad. And for those people, indeed, they cannot exercise their right to vote. So we are discussing absentee ballots or e-ballots, electronic ballots. But voting and election is a very political issue, and again, different part of society have different opinions. When there is a more obvious consensus, I think we will reflect that consensus in our law. Now, speaking of the legal age to enter into marriage, maybe MOJ can discuss that. Yeah, indeed, for men it's 18 years of age, for women it's 16. And whether to adjust them to the same age, this remains a debated issue right now. And different countries have different regulations. So now we're referring to our law, which is our civil code.
And to be a candidate, I think one needs to put some deposit. The rationale is to assure that they are entitled to speak for a group of people, because there is really a group of people supporting them. So after the election, if they get some certain amount of vote, the deposit will be returned. Also, some money subsidy will be provided for their campaign.
Again, on the question of
好，在问到投票权的障碍上面。
You have to correct me if I have misunderstood your electoral system. There is one problem that has been raised, especially for indigenous people, and that is that there is a concept of highland and lowland constituencies which are nationwide. So you would have a constituency that is not geographically in one place, but is scattered where indigenous people are concerned, and therefore a candidate, in terms of canvassing for votes, has to go from place to place and makes it very difficult for them to do the canvassing, or even if they get elected, to protect or may not protect, but to provide support for their constituency, because it's widespread, it's in many places. What is your views on that, and whether you think that is something that needs consideration? And the other is access for voting for the disabled. Transportation is a problem for the blind. The whole balloting system seems to present a problem. So whether you are studying the situation and are considering how best to change all of this. Maybe you can give a quick response.
I think about the disabled voters, I think we already provide every kind of assistance.
Assistance.
Yes, yes.
So there's no problem for that.
Yeah, we don't think there's a problem, but of course we know that the turnout rate for this group is significantly lower than other people. Yeah.
Okay. My last, you have to say something?
我想我这边补充一。
We have highland indigenous, lowland indigenous. So highland indigenous are mostly located in mountainous area, and lowland indigenous live on plains. So for highland indigenous people, currently we have a guaranteed quota that is reserved for them. But our zone, our voting zone is a nationwide zone. So some people are suggesting that maybe we should cluster several zones into a constituency and some other zones as another constituency. But indigenous people themselves have not yet reached a consensus. So the Ministry of Interior is discussing this. We want to come up with a solution that will be accepted by the indigenous people, but so far there has not been consensus. And now coming back to the rate of domestic rates, we commissioned Professor Wang and Professor Chen to do a research. The rate of domestic violence is about 19%. Among these cases, 5.14 is physical violence, and 10.83 are mental abuse, mental violence.
Question on this is to do with the Referendum Act. There's other information that I have read, which says there are institutional impediments built into the Referendum Act. My question really is, have you studied these restrictions? One of which I'm told is that there is a restriction on public participation, a limited time for people to make interventions during the referendum to express their views, and the limited number of people that can come in, because they're not allowed even to participate through a closed circuit, even if they can't be in the main hall. So that is one question. Have you studied these when the referendum on environmental impact of something, or that kind of referendum that's done? And the next question on that is, can there be people-initiated referendum? Can a group of citizens ask to have a referendum on something, because in the interest of the right of participation of the public in policy formulation? I also read that, you have to correct me, I also read that there are restrictions for them to initiate because the number of signatures that they have to get is quite high. Percentage-wise it may be low, but actual figures, absolute figures are high. So have there been any complaints from the public that there are many difficulties in initiating a referendum? So there are these two things. The referendum that is conducted by the government itself restricts public participation, and public initiated referendum also has difficulties.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you for raising these questions. I will explain our Referendum Act, which was enacted in 2003. In the initiation of referenda, there are several possible ways. First, people can initiate referenda. Secondly, the president can initiate a precedent. Thirdly, legislators, the legislative yuan, can initiate a referendum. For people-initiated referenda, according to the Act, the threshold is 0.05% of the voters who participated in the last presidential election must initiate these referenda. Moreover, ballots in the referendum at least 50% of the eligible voters turn out to cast the votes before the referenda is valid. So, starting from the initiation, collecting signatures, indeed, some political party members and civil groups think that the threshold is too high. In 2010 and 2012, government agencies are organized public hearings to listen to different opinions on this matter. Political parties, civil groups, scholars, and experts are still quite divided in terms of their opinion. So, whether or not we want to lower the threshold for initiating referenda, this issue is now being reviewed by the legislators. Some proposals and amendments are being reviewed. So we will work along with the legislative body. Thank you. I speak on behalf of the Central Election Committee. In terms of local referendum, Kaohsiung City and some offshore islands have linked Referendum Act with the statute governing the development of offshore islands. And so for some very special issues, local governments have chosen to link the application of these of the Referendum Act with these special issues. Moreover, according to the Referendum Act, basically the proposition in the referenda must involve a change, a proposed change to the status. In other words, you should not simply raise an issue asking people, do you think this particular public figure did a good job? It is not a valid proposition in referenda. So, for example, there is the so-called consultative referendum, and the Central Election Committee rejected this proposal for consultative referenda. We told the applicant for that consultative referenda that you should change the proposition you raised in the referenda, and the applicant actually brought the issue to the court. So the referendum committee believes that organizing referenda actually takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. So if you organize a referenda which will not result in any changes in the status quo, it is a waste of resources. So far, this is the only controversy we have in relation to Referenda Act. recently in Taiwan, there's a case that is about the small offshore island, which passed in referenda that the island is going to build the gambling facilities, the casino on this island. So indeed, we do have cases where referenda were used to pass or decide some controversial issues. So in terms of the threshold, so far, as you heard, there's no consensus reached. We will continuously look into this matter. As long as Congress has reached consensus, we will act accordingly. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of this review. I am sure that I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues that we are all extremely impressed by everything. That means starting by the very comprehensive report, the 3 reports that your government has submitted, also by the plenty of parallel reports and information provided by the NGO community, but in particular also by the seriousness of this dialogue that we have had yesterday and today. I think you went into all issues. It was a very, very frank and open dialogue, and I want to repeat what my colleague Asma has said. We are there on the invitation of the government to assist you. So please, if we were sometimes seemingly harsh in our questions, it was not to scrutinize you from outside. It was just in the spirit of assisting. If we were too harsh, please, then I do apologize for that. I also would like to apologize for my bad time management. I said that already before. I think we used quite a lot of time, the 3 of us at the beginning, to the detriment of the 2 of you. So I also apologize to both of you. While you were outside, I said that already myself. And in that respect, I particularly wish to express my sincere gratitude to our interpreters who did a marvelous job in working with us. I think you need a special applause. But I also would like to express once more my sincere gratitude to Ming Li Kuo and all his team. Many of them are standing or sitting here, who were organizing all that in the most efficient manner. So many thanks to you. And
I think this was the first-rate training exercise, both for you and for us. There could be no better training than on the job.
And I would think, and I have been in many of the state reporting procedures in Geneva or in New York. I think many other governments could learn a lot from the government of Taiwan in the way, in the seriousness how the government approached this whole exercise. State reporting procedure can be totally useless if the government does only take it as a kind of additional burden, and they just write some kind of report and are not really engaging in the serious dialogue. I see you nodding. You have been very, very long in the Human Rights Committee and from the very beginning on. And there are governments that take it seriously, and then the state reporting procedure can be a highly useful tool of just trying to understand what are the international standards, and also to really do a review of the overall domestic legal system. If you take both committees together, human rights have an impact on every single governmental agency, and I think so it is extremely useful to understand are there differences and are there also shortcomings that can be remedied by means of the state reporting procedure? So in that spirit, I thank you very, very much for your cooperation. We will tomorrow try to write down some concluding observations. We will try to restrict them to what we consider to be the most important issues where we want to assist you in providing you with recommendations, which will then on Friday morning at 10 o'clock be made public to the government, of course, but also to the wider community, including the media, who would certainly then put a lot of questions to us and criticize us, hopefully. So in that sense, I am very grateful, and I close this session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
议事组报告提醒各位长官离场之前，别忘记携带您的随身物品，谢谢。